Okay, and we're going to tag team a little bit and talk about prior authorization.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Basys. Like Patrick said, I'm very excited to be a part of this organization and very interested in partnering. So a little bit about my background. I'm leading business development at Basys. Before starting Basys, I had computer science background, had a bachelor's degree in computer science, grad school degree in data science at Harvard, instructed a course at MIT called Collaborative Data Science for Healthcare. 2 of my students ended up joining me for this particular company, so I'm not complaining. Before this, I also had a startup which got acquired in a matter of 3 years. So this is my second startup, and we have been working with amazing partners on the plan side, on the provider side, such as Mayo Clinic, Eli Lilly, also our investors. So a lot of data coming in from those partners, which helps us train our models. And talking about Basys, we do prior authorization and utilization management using generative AI, natural language processing, deep learning, depending upon the context. But the overarching perspective is to improve healthcare affordability and accessibility. And if I have to talk about challenges in prior authorization, I would say the first and foremost challenge is on reducing administrative burden. It's not just payers, it's also the providers. Providers are the ones who have to package all the prior authorization, read information from Epic and Cerner. Oof, who would want to do that? And then submit all the information, sometimes on faxes, sometimes on phones. On the payer side, payers have to remember all their policies, ever-changing policies, and then read all the medical documentation, sometimes which come in 500 pages or 200 pages, and then try to match the policies with the documents being submitted. So that's one of the challenges. The second challenge is providers are not happy with prior authorization, and it's not a mystery. Everyone knows that. And it leads to a lot of friction between payers and providers, talking about phone calls and faxes, multiple iterations in communication before you can even get the result. One of the providers we were speaking with, they said, we actually never submit prior authorization based on the policies. We submit it based on our triangulation of the policies based on whatever plan we are submitting. Once we get rejected, then is the time we act. So just to put context. And the third perspective is on the members. Members have zero clarity on where they are in the prior authorization journey, and which leads to a lot of anxiety talking about plummeting NPS scores. So why are we talking about prior authorization, and why has it become so famous or maybe infamous? First of all, CMS released a mandate, and I'll talk about that, that contributed to prior authorization being famous and famous. And then Congress also had a lot of discussions and debate on why prior authorization is why it is the way it is. So Congress recently released a mandate which essentially meant prior authorization has to be streamlined and automated within a span of 3 years. That happened almost a year ago. It had 3 significant impacts. One was on the timeline. Instead of spending 7 days to reply to a prior authorization request, payers are now supposed to do it in a matter of 3 days, which is a significant shift from the original perspective. The second one was on transparency. Payers are now supposed to provide all the details about their policies publicly. At the same time, if they're denying a prior authorization request, they're also supposed to provide the rationale to not just the providers, but also to the members. And third and the final point is on interoperability, like being more open to be connecting to the vendors, not just with the other payers, but with the providers as well. Patrick.
Yeah, so our perspective on all of this is kind of, we've got a lot of different perspectives. And we think about the life cycle of the prior authorization. And it takes it from, the intake to the reviews, the decisions, the communication. And here are our thoughts, right? Number one, your PA staff is spending way more time on administrative work than necessary, right? Their skill sets are better utilized. And this really is like reviewing, this documentation is a job for AI, right? So what we want to do is automate the intake process, right? Automate the intake, automate the indexing, automate the queuing process, everything. So take it from any manual work that's being done in the process and getting it done faster through automation. The second is the review process. Your PA staff needs support to make faster and accurate decisions, okay? Reading through volumes of medical records, for instance, and digesting all that, that's really a job for AI, right? Your staff should be making decisions, okay? And so it makes all the sense in the world to leverage AI to analyze those PA requests, to analyze it against medical policy, right? So you're not pouring through the medical policy. AI can prompt those things for you and frame a decision so you can make it faster. We have another perspective, and it's that clinical decisions should remain with clinicians. We're not handing that over to AI, right? But it's a tool. AI is a tool, and automation is a tool for decision makers, for clinicians. So it's one of the most important things that we like to communicate about our perspective and about our product, is it's for the clinicians. It's not meant to replace them. It's meant to give them a tool to make them more productive and enjoy their jobs more. And then finally, we think providers should receive timely and accurate communication. And all events should be completely logged and reviewable. And it's not just the providers, right? When the providers have the most information, then the patients have the most information too, the most transparency, the most visibility. And so we have to make sure that the process becomes completely transparent and auditable. And so these are kind of the perspectives that drive how we develop the capability along these lines. So the solution itself, end to end, is what we ought to be thinking here. So here are the pieces where we plug in. The fax intake. We know that fax is still the majority channel by which prior auth is submitted. Now, of course, we have 278s, we have portals, we have all kinds of things, but it's largely a fax workflow, and for the time being, we have to deal with that, and we have to automate that as much as possible. So with SDS, that's an automated process, right? Our digital mailroom capability is going to provide for the automation of the fax intake, the indexing, the prioritization, the routing. That's why it has a little automation icon by it. We thought that was clever. Indexing, patient demographics, procedures, medications tests, all the data points that you're going to need ultimately when making the decision. That is an automated process as well. Workflow, prioritization, queuing, routing, where's it going, who's receiving it, what are the access permissions for those things? They're all really important to keep in mind. What type of document is it? What stage is it in? That can and should be completely automated. And then we start to get into the AI components, right? So intelligent medical records. We talked about intelligent medical records before. We can integrate the intelligent medical records into understanding using language models, the requests, the clinical documentation, and we can use that to drive the decisions, the analysis. And when it comes to policy analysis, that too is a job for AI, okay? So you're going to have the prior auth requests, you're going to have clinical documentation, and you're going to need a recommendation rationale. That's what the Basys.AI technology brings. So combining all these three components, analyzing one against another with AI, and then framing up to the decision maker saying, I've looked at the request, I've looked at the patient's history, and I've looked at your policy. And I've found that 4 out of the 5 criteria that you're looking for have been met, and 1 has not. And by the way, here's where you need to look, here's where I found the information, and here are our recommendations for next steps. All automated, and all there to support the clinician or the PA staff member. And then finally, the communication. Automate the communication. Once a decision's been made, communicate that. Regularly and automatically communicate status as well, right? A lot of these provider phone calls, what's the status of my prior authorization? Why did you make this such and such decision? Why did you deny my auth decision? This is time spent on the phone that really, really ought to be automated with automated communication. And so that's our perspective on the end-to-end, where the SDS platform ties in with the Basys.AI capability and how it all comes together to form a completely automated prior auth delivery. So I guess I think I'm going to hand it back to Amber to close us out for the day. Yeah.
A little bit of ping pong here.
Yeah.
And before I explain what we do at Basys, I think one thing which I'd like to ground ourselves into is how healthcare is all about removing blind spots and how important the data volume is. So for example, even though we work with the health plans, we made sure before we even started selling that we had a provider partner, such as Mayo Clinic, and a pharma partner, such as Eli Lilly, through which we can train our algorithms. And based on the data we have received from them and some other providers, we have trained our algorithms on more than 1 billion policy combinations and more than 25 million lives. And now if I have to talk about how we actually process a prior authorization, I would begin from the provider side, where we consume all the information, such as medical documentations, charts, lab reports, clinical notes, and convert them into a longitudinal information about a patient on how that patient is progressing from one disease stage to the other. Then on the payer side, we have a rule encoding engine or policy encoding engine, which essentially understands what the policies are, converts them into objectifiable information, such as the rules and the criteria. And the final one is the matching engine, which essentially, for each of the policy criteria, matches it with the provider-submitted information on the members, and if required, can also hyperlink it back to the original document. So that's what we do here. If I have to double-click further, we resolve prior authorization based on the complexity of the request. So for example, if it's a simple request about a prior authorization on DME, we do not reinvent the wheel. We already have the rules. We use simple rules to process the request. At the same time, for more nuanced and let's say more expensive requests, such as MSK and surgery or cardiovascular procedures, we use machine learning or deep learning, sometimes natural language processing as well, of course, to resolve prior authorization. But in case when we are not able to resolve prior authorization using AI, we are still able to summarize all the information in possibly one page, which was coming in 500 pages from the provider, and show it to the right person who can take a call based on the annotation that we have provided. And key business outcomes essentially makes me take back to the first point that I had mentioned. There is a lot of administrative burden on healthcare right now. AI can be used to not play doctor, but it can be used to remove burden from some of the administrative tasks, which is what we are doing. It can also help in making providers' life easier and providing more information and less anxiety to the members. And finally, once you have more automated process, you can also think about being more scalable. And if I have to kind of say one thing in the end, and I would say that AI is not going to replace human beings, clinicians, or health plans, but definitely the health plans, human beings, clinicians who will use AI, they will replace the ones who are not using it. Thank you.